Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the NI's webinar on the value of diversity and inclusion and how do we increase it in our sector. All of you on the phone at the moment are in mute mode, but if you do want to ask any questions or anything occurs to you as we're going along, please, under the drop-down options on your menu, there should be an opportunity for a questions area. Although when we were testing this a moment ago, it wasn't working. So if you find you can't type any questions in there, then please do instead put something in the chat area that appears to be working, and I will address the questions either as we go along or at the end, depending upon the nature of the question. My name is Fiona Jackson. I'm the Deputy President of Women in Nuclear UK. And I'm also Head of Strategic Resourcing for EDF Energy. So my job at EDF Energy is to look after the diversity and inclusion agenda for us. But I'm here today with my Women in Nuclear hat on, as I also sit on a voluntary capacity on the steering group of this organisation, and I'll tell you a bit more about us later on in the presentation. If you'd like to download the presentation, you can do that, and it's under the handout section of your drop-down list on the webinar, where you can actually then keep the presentation for later if you're interested. I also have the presentation showing on my screen at the moment, and we'll be moving the slides through, and I'll try and remember to tell you when I'm going to do that in case you're looking at this locally on your own version. So, with no more ado, I'll move on. So, moving on to the first slide, hopefully, if I can get my slides to work. There we go. So, where are we now as an industry, and why are we talking about this subject of diversity and inclusion? Well, put my head together with some of my colleagues in Women in Nuclear, and these are some of the issues that we feel that we're helping the industry to address. So we're growing our industry in many areas, which is great news, but it does mean we're going to need more people to do that with. And we have an ageing workforce in many parts of our industry, and therefore, as those people are leaving our organisation, how do we ensure that we have a sufficiently large talent pool to enable us to deliver the future benefits that we're going to deliver as a nuclear industry? There's a shortfall in STEM in terms of graduates and resourcing, and a number of different reports have suggested this. One of the main ones from the engineering point of view is Engineering UK, and they predicted that there'll be an annual shortfall of around 69,000 skilled people in the workforce, which is a significant part of our workforce. So how are we going to make sure that our young people are choosing to enter into STEM careers so that they join us as apprentices or graduates or as experienced hires with the skills that we need to deliver our future agenda? There's a diversity at the moment. Now the stats do vary. The NIA suggests about 22% of our workforce is currently female. Other studies have put it as low as 17%, and it's quite a difficult one for us to count in every aspect of what we do. But it's still, a fifth, roughly a fifth of our workforce is female, and yet half of our population in the UK is female. We are now at the highest levels of working women in the UK since we started on record. So there's an increasing workforce out there of women, and yet we're not changing significantly the diversity of our workforce. It has changed and it has grown, and since I've been involved in this industry, we're seeing steady progress. But what more can we do to accelerate that? And this perceived narrow resource pool with the right nuclear experience, it takes a long time for us to train some of the people that we need, to bring them to the suitably qualified level that we need to run our licensed assets. And so it's really important that we not only grow the overall pool, but we also grow it from a point of view of that nuclear experience. And the figures I've just quoted in terms of that sort of between 17 and 22% are female, that also includes the non-SQEP. That also includes all of the women that work in areas that are not the core delivery functions, such as the common areas that you find a lot of women working in, such as HR or administration. Difficulties potentially attracting people to our industry. If you look at the nature of what we do, does it attract people? Has it got perceptions of not looking as modern as it could do? Are we really portraying how exciting and challenging the work can be? And are we really reaching out to our future candidates to work for us and creating something exciting that they want to work with us? And again, retraining. There's a lot of women out there who work in different sectors that have some of the skills that we need. Have we got the right retraining in place to enable us to move those women into our sectors? And have we got the right returning programs? There's a large number of women who leave to have families. How do we make sure that we're encouraging those women to come back into the sector, or actually to move into our sector from other sectors if they're struggling to get back into their sector as well? So there's a number of different challenges that we face as a sector. But why would we bother? Why are we concerned about increasing the talent pool and increasing our gender diversity? So I've moved on to the next slide, and if you're doing it yourself, this is called the value of gender diversity. And I've put this in 3 main pieces of value add. So as an industry, I've already talked about the skills shortages piece as something that we definitely have a challenge to work towards. And so if we expand the talent pool that we have out there, if we consider more widely all the different types of people that could come and join us, then that's going to increase our talent pool, and it's going to mean that we'll be able to overcome potential skill shortages. And there's a lot of companies doing work in the early career sector. We're encouraging girls and young women to move into or carry on with STEM subjects at school and move into the sector. So we need to make sure we're reinforcing that and then looking as attractive as possible for them to come and join us once they've taken the right qualifications. If you look at stronger performance in terms of the value of gender diversity, there are a number of different reports now that have proven analytically that there is value, financial value, and more different types of value. So for example, McKinsey have now published a number of different documents along the theme of Women Matter, and the first one came out in 2007. So if you're interested in understanding more about their research, I do recommend a Google for that one. They've proved that companies with the most gender diverse senior management teams and board teams achieved 48% higher EBITDA and 1.7 times the stock price growth compared with industry average levels of gender diversity on the board. So they've proven at a very senior team that it makes a difference, and in their most recent reports they've started to look at why that may be, and there's a significant growing body of research that shows the different approach and that diverse approach that makes a difference to profitability. There's also a number of different pieces now that prove around innovation and that diverse teams in any aspects, it's not just the gender diversity piece actually, but any aspect of getting different people in a room to work together increases innovation. And that sort of makes sense really from a point of view of if you come from a different perspective, you'll have different ideas to put into the mix, and some of those ideas won't work, but other people can build upon them. And sometimes having more diverse teams are harder teams to manage and are harder teams to work through whilst you're working with them, but actually the performance that comes out the other end in terms of innovation is great. And if you think more about inclusion, not necessarily just diversity, but diversity is the characteristics of the people that you have in the room. Inclusion is how we work together to get the most of that diversity. So alongside diversity goes inclusion. And that inclusion is really important in terms of creating a place where people feel able to be themselves at work, bring their whole selves to work, and speak openly that their opinions matter and they are consulted at work. And if we can do that and we can grow those cultures, then that's going to help our people speak out regarding safety, and our safety culture will increase. And in fact, there's a number of different people that have reinforced that, that the gender diversity will help us increase our safety performance. And then finally, there's a sort of ethical and societal that I've put together. I should have put, legal as well, really, into this bucket. If you're a customer-facing business in what you do, or you have an association with customers, of residential customers, 70% of home-based decisions are made by women. Therefore, having a business that reflects your customer base makes sense, because the decisions are made in the home predominantly by women. Legislation is also veering more strongly towards diversity. We have gender pay gap legislation that came into force recently, and it's requiring all companies with more than 250 employees to report on their gaps between their average pay for women and their average pay for men, as well as the distribution of pay in each quartile between men and women for both core salary and for bonuses. And this is just an example of how government are pursuing a diversity agenda, and they aim to close this gender pay gap and make sure that we've got really fair values of pay. But the other thing that gender pay gap drives, the other thing that's driving gender pay gap is the hierarchy. So if you have more senior men than senior women attracting bigger salaries, we're going to get a pay gap because we've got a hierarchy there. Not necessarily that we don't pay men and women equally for the same value of work, but because of the hierarchy. And therefore, the gender pay gap will, the government hopes, force us to examine our organisations and understand the diversity that we have at every level of that organisation. And all the political parties have got, the main three, have got in their manifestos a commitment to gender pay gap, and also some of them want to take it further, and we're looking at putting it into ethnicity and LGBT as well. So legislation is growing when it comes to diversity issues, and therefore from a compliance perspective as an organisation, we ought to be thinking about how do we get on the front foot to make sure that we're ready when this compliance, when we have to be compliant, and maybe go above and beyond that to show that we are responsible employers from a point of view of diversity. And finally, from a sort of ethical perspective, it's just the right thing to do. If you have daughters or nieces and nephews, granddaughters, you want a fair world for them. I certainly do. And therefore, we need to make sure that we've got a fair and equitable approach to how we employ, keep, value, recruit and progress the women in our organisation. So, having explored some of the values and the point of why we'd have gender diversity, I just now want to move forwards and talk a little more about, well, who are women in nuclear and what are we doing to try and progress this. So if you move on to the next slide, who are women in nuclear, our mission is to address this nuclear industry's gender balance, to improve the representation of women in leadership, and also to engage with the public on nuclear issues, because our research shows that women are less engaged with nuclear, the industry itself, and therefore as women working in that industry, we want to talk to women who aren't in the industry about what a great industry it is, and help them understand more what we're about and why we exist. And we've got three main work streams and areas of focus, and the first of these is attraction. So this is how we would like to support the industry in attracting more people to work for us, both from a point of view of younger women joining a career in the sector at an entry level, but also for women who may want to move into the sector, and we're doing a number of different initiatives to support that activity. Our second main aim is support retention and career progression of women already in the industry in a number of different ways, and I'll talk more in a minute about what we're doing there. And our final one is to promote dialogue with the public about the nuclear industry, but also with politicians and generally sort of lobbying across government and industry bodies with a diversity agenda. We were formed in early 2014 to help improve diversity and increase the skills base in the industry. And these committees really that we run really are working towards encouraging engagement with schools, universities, support those already in the sector with career progression, and as I said, engage outside the industry. One of the things that we have as a big focus is a team focused on an industry charter, which is we currently have over 50 companies within our sector signed up to this charter to commit to making a difference and provide a toolkit to bring together experts and information in one place. We're part of an international organisation of Women in Nuclear Global, and we're the UK chapter, and there's another over 30 international chapters. So we also connect with our colleagues across the globe to look at what more could we do from a gender diversity perspective, and who's doing what and what success are they finding, and how can we share that best practice across the globe. And our members aren't just engineers. Our members come from a wide range of sectors, from consultants, regulators, project planners, you know, in the Navy, in the defence, lawyers, PR, and me, you know, I'm in HR. So it is about working across all the different parts of the business. So what do we do with to help this? And I've moved on to the next slide, which talks about what does WiN UK do. Well, as I've mentioned, we at the top of my bubble there, I talked about the industry charter, and on my next slide I'll go into quite a lot of detail about that, so I won't focus too much on this slide. But we also have a programme of school ambassadors, and more recently we have started expanding from a central team into having local organisations in Women in Nuclear. We currently have got them in Cumbria in the northwest. We have them in the southwest. We're looking to grow one in London at the moment and in the southeast. And this is about bringing together people who are interested in the ambitions of WiN and supporting gender diversity in our industry to hold more local events that are more accessible to more people, that can be focused on local issues and local activity, and to engage businesses more locally. So if you're interested in that, maybe an opportunity at the end to get involved, let me know through the chat. We're always looking for volunteers, because this is a voluntary organisation, to be in small working groups to get things working on a local basis. But through this local contacts, we can also create a school ambassador programme. So we get invitations from schools and colleges and universities to go and speak and provide role models as to the younger people in our society, to show them that there are jobs out there for them, and this is the sort of things that they can do. So if we look at skills development through both local events and through our annual conference that I've put in the middle there, we run a number of workshops to encourage women who are already in our sector to develop their skills. So we've run skills training on networking, we've run skills training on how to work social media, how to present, how to build confidence. And these are a number of different areas that we've been asked to look at running to support the women in our industry in developing themselves, to enable themselves to put themselves forwards for things. And quite often at industry events we run speed mentoring, and we found this is incredibly valuable for both the mentors and the mentees. So it's a bit like speed dating, but without the dating bit, whereby we get together some experienced industry professionals with a number of people who are just maybe starting in their career or looking for some support and advice on how to move forwards in their career. And they have the opportunity to move around sort of every couple of minutes and speak to different mentors in the room, asking them the same or different questions so that they can get the most out of the collective experience in the room towards developing themselves. And again, we get great feedback from both the participants from a mentee perspective who feel it's really valuable to giving them support, and also from the mentors, because they learn about somebody else. They learn what sort of things are worrying the women in their organisations, and they start to learn about a different perspective. And understanding that perspective is very important to increasing, getting to a gender balance. So I mentioned briefly before, we've got some careers guides and toolkits. So we have a site on the NI site, and from there you can access at the moment quite a few career guides and toolkits, how-to guides that talk and give advice and support on how to develop yourself. And we have pending and due to come out shortly a series of guides as well for organisations, to where people that are running organisations or senior leaders and leaders who may be interested in developing gender diversity to get advice and guidance on how to do different things that we put into our charter, for example. So we're developing that advice and we're using best practice from across lots of different organisations, both inside and outside our sector, to achieve that. So at the moment it's just career guides, but coming soon we're going to be putting on there the organisational guides too. And we've partnered with WES, so it's Women in Engineering and Science, to give access to MentorSet. And MentorSet is a wider mentoring scheme across science, engineering and technology to encourage the partnering cross organisations of mentoring. And this is something that can be both participated from on an individual basis, but what we're encouraging is those organisations who have signed our industry charter to take this up on an organisational basis, as it provides an opportunity for the women in their organisations to gain mentoring and support from a wider section of the SET community to encourage them to develop their skills and look for opportunities to grow. And I've already said we lobby. We, for example, when the gender pay gap legislation came out, we put in a viewpoint on behalf of women in nuclear as to what we felt would be important to include and not include in that legislation. So we work in with government and with various industry stakeholders to look at what we can do to advance the gender parity in our industry. So let's go back to the industry charter that I've mentioned a few times, because this, we feel, gives quite a lot of ideas on what organisations can do to support gender diversity in the industry. So I'll just move on to the next slide, called the WiN Charter Commitments. And you can see here I've put in summary the statements that we have in our charter, and we ask senior members of organisations in our industry to sign up to this charter. And as I said, since 2014 when we launched, we now have over 50 organisations, and that's growing constantly thanks to the sterling work of the team responsible for that on the WiN steering group. We're starting a process now of going back and talking to those organisations who signed up 3 years ago to say, well, what have you done? What's looking good? Share with us your best practice, and we're going to start publishing that best practice on our newsletters to share across the industry who's doing great stuff and what impact is it having, so that we can give ideas to other organisations in our sector. So the first one of these that we're recommending is transparency of opportunity. So this is about making sure that when organisations are attracting staff, they are being very visible about those opportunities and those roles, both within and also as they progress up the career pathway. this is to try and make sure that we get rid of the sort of old boys network approach to recruitment, and open it up. You know, one of the pieces of research I've read recently suggests that women prefer to operate within the formal organisational structures rather than the informal ones, which is why I think we get quite so much of a demand for networking. And because of that, you know, they'll sign up to job boards, they'll put things on alerts, etc. They'll actively look for roles, but many roles aren't advertised, and a lot of jobs go to who you know rather than the formal process. Now, I'm not saying this happens in any of your organisations, but it is something that's happened in the past, and it's something that we need to just keep an eye on, and we're asking the organisations to sign up to saying, yeah, we'll make sure that happens. The next one we've got there is promote a balanced view of the sector. Now, this is very important in terms of role modelling and imagery. This is in terms of making us look an attractive organisation to join. We may have only, you know, a fifth of our workforce is female, but we need to make sure that some of the visual representations of that, or, you know, who gets chosen to speak at events, the visual face of the nuclear industry becomes more gender balanced. There is a significant amount of research that shows that younger women in particular are very affected by role modelling, and they want to see people they feel are like them doing jobs that they feel they might want to do, to reinforce that they can do that. So if any of you on the phone have responsibility for, or know people that have responsibility for in your sector and your organisations, you know the advertising that you do on websites, for example, or the pop-up banners that appear at different events, or have responsibility for putting forward speakers to go to industry activity. You know, do make sure that you're getting and you're thinking through, am I getting a good gender balance on these boards, on these panels, and in my imagery? One of the things we encourage organisations to do, I'm going to pop to the bottom left now because I think it underpins a lot of the others, is this measure and tracking progress. You know, what gets measured gets managed is an old mantra, but it's one that definitely holds true. And by measuring the number of women in your organisation at different levels and their progression, you'll be able to see what's happening. And by looking at that, you'll be able to spot where there may be blockages, for example. So one of the things we've talked about in another example is removing barriers. Well, you know, if you review and if you need to find these potential barriers, you may find them through the measuring and tracking the progress. So, for example, and I'm going to talk an EDF Energy example here. You know, 3 years ago, we were getting a relatively small number of young women applying to our apprenticeship programs, but and so we started tracking and monitoring the percentage of young women that applied compared to the number of women that achieved the results that we needed in every stage of the assessment process compared to those that started with us. And through doing that, we spotted that there was one of those hurdles that we'd put in place where the women were not doing as well. And yet another one of those hurdles, the women were doing spectacularly well. So we asked ourselves, what have we got in our process that's putting in some bias? And we've changed it, and we've looked at it again, and we now can see a much more consistent number of women at every single stage of the process that apply, so much so that we've significantly increased the number of young women that's joining us. So by measuring it, it enabled us to spot where there was a barrier and change it and do something about it. So measuring and tracking progress is really important, both through your normal HR functions, but also through things like the employee engagement survey. So how are women feeling, and is it any different to the men? And if it is, why is that? And you can start to explore and focus on priority areas and make meaningful difference by that measuring and tracking progress. And I mention that here because before I go and talk about address unequal gender representation, which was on the second row there, obviously you'll only know you've got unequal gender representation if you monitor it, and other than in your very senior board positions where it's very easy to count because there's a smaller number of people in those populations. So it is important to understand where there is unequal gender representation and to make progress through positive action to changing that. Now, positive action is a legal process by where, it's legal to do, unlike positive discrimination. I'm just going to explain the difference because they do get confused quite a lot in people's minds. So positive action is where you take action to make sure that there is a level playing field. Doesn't necessarily mean you treat everybody the same. Treating everybody the same may actually be discriminating and putting barriers in place, but you just need to think about it. Positive action is where you are allowed under law to make changes to processes in order to make sure that at the point of decision there is a fair and equal process. So, for example, not in a gender diversity way, but in a social economic way. So there is an organisation I'm aware of that I'm not going to mention because I haven't got their approval to say, but they did some work with the Social Mobility Foundation looking at their graduate recruitment processes. And they found that they got very few applications from people from a low socioeconomic grouping, and when they did, they performed really badly at assessment centre. And so they looked at that and they said, why is that? And they did some research and understood that actually they haven't got people, if they're the first to university, they're the first people in their families that have gone through this experience, they don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And the research from the hiring managers during the process was they're very much like rabbits in the headlights. They were scared and didn't know what was going to go on. Therefore, they weren't prepared. So this organisation took some of those applications, worked with an external organisation and ran some pre-assessment centres. So this is about saying, look, just giving them visibility. This is the sort of thing that goes on. This is what's likely to happen. This is how you can prepare best for this situation and for this assessment. And then they put them in the recruitment process as normal, and they participated alongside everybody else, and they were scored the same, marked the same, but however they performed better because they had experience, and that's positive action. Positive discrimination is illegal, and it is where you say, well, I'm going to put that person into the job because they're a woman. And we don't want to go there, and it's not about doing that, because none of the women want to get jobs just because they're a woman. They want to get jobs because they're the best woman, best person for that job. And therefore it's about those actions that we're taking to support different people in our organisation in different ways such that the outcomes are fair. So this is very, the next one I was going to talk about was clear and supportive career pathways. Making it very clear, how do you get on in this organisation? How do you get into these roles? How do you progress up the career ladder? How do we make sure that it's very visible who's in what process? So for example, if you have a talent process for senior leadership in your organisation where you assess everybody, how do you get put forward into that process? What's the nomination process? Is that fair? Is it visible? Is everybody clearly see, or is it who knows who? You know, how do we make these things visible so that everybody can participate in them and actively encourage and support the fact that we want gender diversity, so therefore please apply. But then it's back to, again, it's not discrimination, and these, you know, women have to take part on a fair basis with the men. A gender balanced senior team in the middle there on the left, again, is really important for two reasons. First of all, as we've seen with the McKinsey research, that senior team being gender balanced is more likely to have positive outcomes in terms of performance, but it's also likely to provide those role modelling opportunities where the people in the organisation can see that there are women in these senior positions, and therefore if, you know, she can, so can I. But also provide that diversity of thought at that really senior level, to make sure that when we're putting internal processes in place that they're constantly being challenged as to are they fair and equitable. We need to look at educating leaders in inclusivity and bias. So there's a style of leadership that we could put in place about authentic leadership. This is about, you know, being the leader with your best, bring your best diverse characteristics into play. And as leaders and as individuals, are we being inclusive? And are we encouraging people that come from different backgrounds with different experiences to participate? This thing about unconscious bias is a bit of a fad at the moment, and it's definitely growing, but there's some really good rooted theory behind it. in that everybody has some sort of bias, because as you grow up, you acquire these biases. As you work in different places, you acquire them. As you have friends in different groups, you acquire them. And it's about making your unconscious ones conscious, so that you can be positively challenging yourself as to whether or not this is the right footpath. And personally, I've come across some of myself with these biases before, and I've invited people to interview panels with me who I know will have a different view, and somebody that I've potentially disagreed with actually on quite a lot in the past, because we come from totally different places when we're looking for things in people, and I've invited them to interview with me, because I want somebody who's going to challenge me and make sure that my biases don't come to the fore when I'm recruiting or looking at how we put together project teams, for example. So different types of bias, there's a ton of them, and it's a really interesting area to study if you're interested, and I haven't got enough time on the call to go through it. But if you're interested, then please do go and have a look about bias. I've spoken briefly about removing barriers. You know, if you measure and track your process, where are you not getting the representation that's proportional to your existing number of women, let alone the recruitment of them? And look to understand what those barriers are and remove them. And they may be things that are around maternity, but they may not. And there may be a load of other reasons. So don't make assumptions. Go and look at the numbers, research, talk to people in your organisations. And review your HR policies and practices. Make sure they're up to speed. Make sure they're modern. Make sure they reflect the current legislation, and go, you know, for things like parental leave, and make sure that they are delivering the outcomes that you want in terms of your gender diversity. And the final one that I haven't talked about there is creating opportunities to network, to mentor, and to coach. This is about encouraging the women in your organisation to work and put themselves forward, but actually everybody involved in that, from a coaching or a mentoring perspective, it's about increasing knowledge and understanding of different types of people. So all of those are really important, and I think these charter commitments definitely show a mixture of, you know, challenging and changing the organisations that we have, but at the same time supporting and enabling the women to both join and stay within our organisations. So what can you do? Well, you could look at what your business looks like. No one diversity challenge, no one organisation is going to have the same diverse challenges. As an industry, we have some common ones, but actually we're all very different in terms of the nature of the business that we do and where we have issues and blockages and different organisational structures. Therefore, this making diversity and inclusion come to life in your organisation has to be about making it appropriate to your context. So, you know, it's about considering what your business does, and actually, are you appealing to a diverse workforce in terms of what you're doing? What can you change? What positive action can you take, and who can you enlist to help you? So, for example, you know, think long term. Invest in school programs to attract girls into engineering. You know, invest in apprentice and graduate recruitment with a focus on women if that's an area that you need to work on. Maybe look for transferable skills and think a bit differently about recruiting. Maybe think about some core skills that you could then, you know, nuclearise in terms of knowledge and understanding. What about the ways of working in the business environment? What do you need to do to change your organisation to make it more gender diverse? How can you market your business to make it sort of fresh and relevant to the new talent? And, you know, perhaps you could have networks for women or LGBT ethnicity to encourage support, but also act as a voice to your organisation to give you help and advice on how to change. I think this is all about innovative thinking. It's about, you know, as I put there, bust the old paradigms. To make a change, you have to do something different, as I think Einstein once said. So how do we make it happen? Well, it won't happen by magical wizardry, a bit tongue-in-cheek here, and it will only happen if we take action. So, you know, I do hope you're dialed into this call, you're really interested in taking that action, or if you're listening to this again on replay, you know, what could you do personally to change the current landscape? And I'm really hoping you'll want to be part of that change, because I think Women in Nuclear is here to help. But at the same point, you know, everybody has to take part in that. And so will you be part of that? And I know you will. And now I'm going to open it up to any questions. I haven't seen any arrive while I've been speaking, so I'm not going to speak for a little while. And I don't know if you can have a look now. Can you have a look at the questions, and you can type questions there? Or the other area to do it is under chat, and there's an opportunity to add chat here. So hopefully you can see me typing now. Ask your questions here. So if you've got any questions, please do either type them in the chat box or put them in the questions